Sit down. This isn't gonna be a happy video. Yeah, I'm sorry, but these happen every now and again. Before I begin, I should probably preface this upload with the fact that yeah, while I am ripping into Meat Boy 3D throughout this thing, I do acknowledge the original Super Meat Boy is not a flawless game. Almost no game is. It pains me to say this, but I have a full-time job, a gym membership, a condo, a YouTube channel, and a cat. Sounds like I'm flexing here, but they're all awful. My point is I don't have as much time to play games as I used to. So when I found out I was gonna have to take a chunk out of my weekend to play the next underwhelming looking Meat Boy game, I was cautiously pessimistic. And that pessimism was, I'd say, justified. Because it is. Super Meat Boy was a diamond made under pressure, so Super Meat Boy 3D was pressured to be a diamond, understandably so. Yet 3D fails in almost all regards. The soundtrack is frustratingly average compared to the composer's work on Mewgenics. The minimalistic, underdog, newgrounds visual flair of the original has been swapped with the vapid, soulless 3D of what looks like a friendslop game, and the animations, particularly the Dr. Fetus ones, feel straight up incomplete. A lot of little things don't matter to the developers of Super Meat Boy 3D, it seems, at least when it comes to visuals, and those little things add up quick, like transition animations being non-existent, and menus lacking anything resembling life. I understand a lot of this might sound petty because I'm not even talking about the gameplay so far, but with how much the original game's attitude contributed to its charm, I feel it's important that that remain intact in its sequels, and it mostly just does not here. Super Meat Boy is my fourth favorite game of all time. It's more than a game. It was a flag planted in the ground by Flash developers, strengthening a relationship between Newgrounds and the indie game scene, emboldened when you take the emotional roller coaster that is Indie Game the Movie into account. So seeing that get turned into something lesser was an affront to the many-faced god. Before you say anything, because I feel like someone will comment this, I understand that the indie game scene is a lot more competitive now, that it's a lot more difficult to be influential now. Meat Boy may be on the Mount Rushmore of indie games, but it's doubtful any of its predecessors will also be, and yes, maybe so. I comprehend that this game has a tough act to follow, but we've seen influential indie games get good sequels before, like Slay the Spire 2, which adds co-op among many things, and Rogue Legacy 2, which is actually fun. That last one, Rogue Legacy 2, actually wasn't nearly as well known as its predecessor, but it could at least in good faith say it was a very solid successor to an admittedly more influential first game. Through hard work and grit, Meat Boy 3D could have been that. I wish I could say it is. I cannot. A red flag for me was that the Steam page for the game advertises an 8 out of 10 from IGN as a award. Like, 8 out of 10 isn't bad, don't get me wrong, but usually you don't pat yourself on the back over a score unless it's like 9 or higher. At least an 8.5. Now, based on what I've said, you might be surprised at the score landing as high as an 8. There is a fair reason it got that number, though. But first, if you're a fan of games that take place underground, then I can confidently recommend this video's sponsor, Core Keeper. Core Keeper is a game that has everything you love about survival crafting games distilled into one beautiful package. Explore the vast underground with friends as you take on enemies, upgrade your weapons, and build your dream house. I absolutely love the progression in this game. I'll never forget the first time I unlocked a portal that let me travel between my beach and normal houses. Between the bags and blasts and void and voltage updates, there's a ton of new stuff here for people who love both automation and quality of life changes, such as the ability to quick deposit items into nearby chests. Your eyes and ears are not lying to you right now. Core Keeper is a gorgeous game with an amazing soundtrack that I listen to all of the time. I've done a sponsored video for them before. Absolutely check it out if you can. There's plenty more updates on the way. Click the link to the game in the description to learn more, and thanks to Fireshine Games for sponsoring the video. Despite everything, there is a joy from the first Meat Boy that this game successfully translates into 3D. Okay, so some rough editing here. I'm coming at you after I've edited the entire video. I discovered a really funny glitch. So normally in the Meat Boy games you have to beat the light world version of the levels to be able to do the dark world versions, but if you complete a dark world level and then just go to the next one, you can start playing the dark world version of that next level even if you haven't unlocked it on the map. See right here, I haven't unlocked the second dark world level, but I can play it right after I beat the first dark world level. So yeah, One thing we all learned to love from his debut on 360 was that even an environment punctured with giant chasms and barely anywhere to stand could still be traversed by Meat Boy. Despite his reputation for being fragile, a la splattering into a million pieces on touch, he could leap and land places the Mario Brothers could only dream of, and that's still the case. How does that control in 3D? Fairly well, as it so happens. The satisfaction of bounding and throwing yourself across bottomless pits and infinitely wall jumping a single surface is very much intact, giving you fleeting feelings from years gone by of finding shortcuts and barely getting those bandages. I mean it when I say finding shortcuts were some of the most fun parts of the Meat Boy franchise. Realizing, oh, I don't even have to jump there technically. A well-timed sprint here, a well-placed jump there. That's all I need to get to the end. It makes you feel smart, it makes the game feel fast, it's just fun. Yes, Super Meat Boy is not the only platformer where shortcuts are a part of the fun, but there was something about overcoming these tiny gauntlets of levels. Something about starting from nothing, getting churned and spit out by saws over and over again before tricking the stage itself, skipping chunks of it through spite, through resilience. Not skipping all of the level, but making these incremental improvements through outsmarting the environment. It just made for a compelling experience. Like I said, some of that is here. I found many instances where I could outsmart the level and dash over entire places in an effort to get those A+ times. It isn't often we get a decent 3D platformer. Yes, Yizo, I know about Tori 3D, don't worry. So getting one that's not only decent but stars Meat Boy himself did stir me emotionally in spite of the gripes I've stated. Earlier I mentioned bandages, which are to Meat Boy what stars are to Mario. What do these bandages unlock? We'll get to that very soon. In addition to the sprint jump and wall jump from SMB, you have an air dash now, which allows the level designers to not only create more varied environmental obstacle courses, but give you much needed course correction for when the camera works against you, which is unfortunately common. It wasn't as bad as I was led to believe by others who have played 3D, but it's definitely an issue, made worse by the fact that the game isn't consistent about what Meat Boy can climb and not climb. Sometimes you'll hit an invisible wall, other times surfaces will just reject your wall jump. There is somewhat of a visual language the game uses to communicate what's jumpable and what's not, but it's not as clear-cut as it should be, and mistakes will be had. The optional collectible bandages in each level unlock characters, except unlike Forever, 3D's characters are from fun video games. Sometimes. Special guest characters are back, though don't expect any heavy hitters like Shovel Knight or anything. They also control differently on occasion, which is welcome, like this truck that makes you feel like you're playing a different video game owed to its extra weight and grit. I actually thought it was really cool. Bandages aren't the only way to unlock new characters. Warp zones return, and this time around, some take inspiration from N64 games, which I found very novel. I won't spoil these in footage, just know that some are very clear homages to old video games, and irregardless of what you think of 3D, I think these will put a smile on your face, at the least. Among the multiple worlds, the first one is a forest, because of course it is. No Meat Boy game, not even the Map Pack Flash one or Mean Meat Machine, has had a first level that is not in a forest. Video games. Credit where credit's due, the second world's not a hospital this time. That's something. Do the worlds actually feel different? Yeah. The different level objects and varied behavior in platforms do a good job of making each area feel distinct. Video game design 101? Maybe, but I feel it's important to point out when it's done right. I especially liked avoiding the rolling cubes and climbing the dissolving TVs, or whatever these things are. Also, I couldn't help but feel giddy when I saw the return of some familiar obstacles like the rockets from the salt factory, or the lasers. Unsurprisingly, adding a third dimension does make these old level objects new again, but I do think you'll be surprised at just how differently they feel. What about bosses? Bosses are a mixed bag. A handful are basically just auto-scrolling levels with an enemy stitched on. In all fairness, the first game had moments like this as well, but that doesn't excuse the sometimes lackluster bosses here, especially with how good Forever's ended up being most of the time. Some of the bosses are okay, like the second one where you have to dodge these tendrils. It's not anything particularly groundbreaking, but I did have fun. I did enjoy it. I like it. Putting aside the uninspired visuals, at least outside of the warp zones, Super Meat Boy 3D's biggest gripe is being just okay, as that uninspired feeling does bleed into the gameplay itself. Say what you want about Super Meat Boy Forever, but there's no denying it had soul. To many a misplaced soul that didn't understand the game. To many a misplaced soul that didn't understand the gameplay or style of the original game, but a soul all the same. Tommy felt confident in the project despite Edmund's absence, animations were impeccable, the story surprisingly layered, and the boss fights were well designed around the auto-running. Most of them anyway. It's fitting that, like Meat Boy himself, the Meat Boy franchise can die multiple times. Forever, Mean Meat Machine, and now this. Super Meat Boy 3D can't be Meat Boy because Meat Boy doesn't know what it wants to be, an homage to its Flash roots, a really well-animated auto-runner, or a Roblox game. Like, some of the characters in these levels feel like they were ripped out of other games. I don't mean the playable ones, I mean stylistically, some of the guys in the backgrounds of these levels just feel kind of there, like they were randomly copy and pasted from some other work. I get that I'm being harsh, not for nothing. The devs seem nice, like the marketing for the game and the in-game humor, to their credit, does match the first title. Some of it even made me laugh, but that's not enough to save it. Perhaps some of what I'm saying isn't fair, cause in Super Meat Boy I chalked the slightly amateurish look as a plus, a boon to the game's personality, whereas here I'm lambasting Super Meat Boy 3D particularly for its visual imperfections. While taking into account the time the original game came out, and the then increased novelty of seeing a hand-drawn game in the first place, or even just a Flash game get upgraded to a full release, I feel it was easier to overlook these kinds of things, and the rough edges definitely just work better in 2D than 3D. Just taking humor into account, cutscenes from the first game felt like Edmund just ran with the first funny gag he thought of, and that genuine raw internet style of comedy shined through bright and strong. The second game featured a more polished, almost corporate mandated looking art style that ditched the original's feel, yeah, but it had a clear vision from Tommy. As is, 3D feels like it's vapid of not only Edmund, but Tommy as well, put in the hands of someone who cares about the franchise only to the bare extent it's needed. Super Meat Boy 3D might be worth your time, on a sale, a deep sale. It's clear that there is some care for the source material, and the different characters add loads more hours to an otherwise short game. Having said that, it's important to keep in mind what was lost. If you really want to tap into a game that channels what makes the first Meat Boy so great, just play Dust Force. Thanks to my patrons, including Mike, Melody, Nate the Great 228, Jaden, Neuronir, Shizu, Stalking, Hidden, Alley, Alex, Flacco, Amber Beanbag. Become a patron for early access to videos among other benefits, join the server, follow me on X, all that crap, subscribe for indie game stuff, be it platformers or RPG Maker games, and I'll see you around. Booba.